All right, guys, in this video, we're going to create an Xpenology virtual machine. It's going to be running on ESX. We're going to use the latest, which is 7.0 U3C, I believe. We're going to use the latest Disk Station Manager software, or DSM, which is going to be 7.0.1. And we're going to step this through from beginning to end, right? There's a lot of posts out there. Some of them give you little nuggets. They show you a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Some of them are in a foreign language like Korean or what have you. As someone who has been a fan of Xpenology for a long time, I'm super excited to share this information with you. I've kind of stepped through all of this. I've written it all down. I've created a blog. I'm going to refer to that blog and post a link in this video. But this is really intended to be a follow me along as I do this. I want you to see it from the very first mouse click that I make all the way to the end when I have a fully functional Xpenology virtual machine running. So if that sounds good to you, let's watch the video. All right, we're ready to build this thing, so let's get started. What you're gonna see here is my blog. Pardon me while I look down at my monitor, because I really wanna share this information with you to show you that what I'm gonna be doing is actually what I've written, right? So as you look here on the screen, you can see that I've got this blog, and in this blog, I talk about building the DS3622 XS Plus. That's the latest and greatest version that's available that this process really works well with. It's a powerhouse of a physical Synology. It runs in like the $3,000 range from a bare metal perspective. And my interaction with this as a virtual Synology, or the Xpenology as it's called, has been really good. So here's a couple things, right, I'm going to give you. The first thing is, what's the guest OS type going to be? Well, I know for a fact that the kernel version that they use in this Tiny Core Red Pill is a Linux 5.x kernel. So when we create this virtual machine in vSphere, we're going to choose other 5.x or later Linux, and it's a 64-bit operating system. We're going to choose 4 CPUs and 4 gig of RAM. Now, your mileage may vary on this. It really depends on what you're going to use this for. A lot of different things that you can use with Package Center, a lot of different capabilities that exist. I've had good success with doing many things, but from a core fundamental perspective, I would say 4 CPUs and 4 gig of RAM is a really good place to start, and then you can feel free to adjust that as you see fit, right? Pay attention to the resource monitor, look at the resources that are being consumed that's reporting back to you using vCenter or ESXi monitoring or what have you, and then just make your adjustments as necessary. We're going to add 2 SATA controllers. And so I really wish that we could do this with the Paravirtual SCSI controller. That's not to say that that won't happen at some point as this Tiny Core Red Pill continues to be developed. But in my experience, I had really good success with the SATA controller. I've done a lot of benchmark testing using the SATA controllers, and I've ran somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 100 virtual machines simulated in a boot storm running off of a NAS data store that was presented using the virtual Xpenology. I tell you all that to say that I'm comfortable in this example with using SATA controllers. We're going to add 2. We're going to add SATA controller 00, and that's going to be what the boot drive is going to exist on. And then we're going to add another SATA controller, and that's where we're going to put all of our data drives that we actually want to use for data within the Xpenology. So the thing that I mentioned here is that every single time that you try to add a drive in vSphere, it's going to try to add a Paravirtual SCSI controller, and we're going to have to pay attention to that. We're going to have to take and modify that drive to point directly to the SATA controller instead of the default SCSI controller, and then remove that Paravirtual SCSI controller just to kind of keep it all clean, right? Final thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the CD-ROM device and make that nice and clean. And that's going to become our template for any future Xpenology virtual machines that we may want to deploy. So let's jump over now into vCenter. Let's go through this. I'll show you exactly what I mean, and then we'll see what that looks like, right? So I've got my test environment up running here, and I'm just going to go to my ESX machine here and say new virtual machine, and I'm going to step through this, right? So Xpenology, I'm comfortable with that. Call it whatever you would like, right? It's going to deploy on our ESXi host. I'm going to choose a data store. I've got 2 1 terabyte drives here that are just in a data store cluster. And I'm going to continue on next. I'm going to let it be the latest and greatest version, which is 7.0 U2 or later. That's going to give us the newest hardware version from a virtual machine hardware perspective. And I'm going to change this to Linux, and I'm going to drop down here to other Linux other 5.x or later Linux 64-bit. When we configure our virtual hardware, again, as I mentioned, I'm just going to do 4 virtual CPUs and I'm going to do 4 gig of RAM. Now I've beat this up pretty heavily, right? And what I would recommend is that over here from a CPU perspective, give this at least 1,000 megahertz to reserve CPU, especially if you're doing this as a nested virtual storage appliance inside of your ESX environment, so that's always guaranteed to have the resources. I also check this box that says reserve all guest memory. That is going to eliminate the swap file that would be created that is equivalent to the size of the RAM, in this case 4 gig, that would also be placed on that data store. It also, again, is another guarantee to make sure that you have all the resources that you need. So I'm going to delete this stuff, right? I don't need the drive and I don't need the paravirtual SCSI controller. Because I picked the other 5.x or later, it's going to be guaranteed to have a VMXNet 3 NIC. We're going to verify that. That's a good thing. We're also going to remove the CD-ROM drive. And then I'm going to add 2 SATA controllers, SATA controller number 1 and SATA controller number 2. And I'm just going to go ahead at this point and finish, and I want to show you what this looks like. So now if I just come back in here and I look at my settings, I've got 4 CPUs, I've got 4 gig of RAM. I'm on my default virtual machine network with a VMXNet 3 network adapter type. I have 2 SATA controllers, and at this point I'm pretty good. Now, the boot drive I reference here in my blog. If I jump back over here, right, we're going to upload now this tiny core red pill VMDK to the data store. I do need to go back and change the boot options firmware from UEFI to BIOS. And then I'm going to upload this tiny core red pill VMDK from this link here. When I click on this link, these are the 2 files that I'm referring to, and I can really right click on each one of these and just say download. Save both of them to a local folder because I'm going to upload them to that data store. So first things first, we're going to edit the settings. We're going to go to VM options. We're going to go to boot options, and we're going to change this from EFI to BIOS. Very good. Next thing we're going to do, with the virtual machine highlighted, I'm going to go to the data store and I'm going to browse this data store. This is the directory, right, that matches the virtual machine name. And I'm going to upload those 2 files that you'll download. Those 2 files are right here. I've already downloaded them. Highlight both of them. Upload those to your data store. Now, when those finish uploading, what we're going to do is we're going to come back over to the virtual machine settings, and we're going to add an existing hard disk, and we're going to place this VMDK that we're uploading right now on SATA 00. That's going to be our boot drive. We'll then add a data drive. In this case, I'm just going to make it 100 gig to be real simple, and I'm going to put that on SATA 1:0, the first position in the second controller. I've added 6 drives in my testing, and I've done that a couple different ways. SATA 101112, SATA 101112, and then moved on to a third SATA controller and said SATA 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2. Both of those work. So it really depends on how you want to do that. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to edit our settings, and we're going to add an existing virtual disk, and I'm going to browse to where I just uploaded that file from, and that's the wrong data store. It's this one right here, because we're looking for the Xpenology folder. And when I select that, you can see here it says tiny core red pill 0.45. That's the VMDK that we want. Notice how it tries to automatically add this SCSI controller. I can't remove that by default. It won't actually let me click it there. The reason is because when you add that existing hard disk, it automatically wants to add a new SCSI controller and make it SCSI 00. Before we can remove the SCSI controller, we've got to change the position of the drive. So what we do is we expand this drive. Notice it says new SCSI controller, and we're going to put this on SATA controller 00. Now we can actually remove that paravirtual SCSI adapter. Now the next thing that I'll do is I'm going to add a hard disk, and it's going to do the same thing again. As soon as I click on add hard disk, it's going to try to add that SCSI controller again. Well, I'm going to make this 100 gig, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this on SATA 1.0. Again, put all your data drives on SCSI 1:0 and higher, not on the SCSI 0:1 or 2 or 3, okay? So as soon as I've done that, I can now come back and remove this SCSI controller, and I click on OK. And this is just a data store. Because I have a data store cluster, it's making some recommendations here. If you're only doing this on a single data store, you won't actually see this screen. And I click on OK. Now, reviewing this one more time before we get started. 4 CPU, 4 gig of RAM. My boot drive is on SATA 00. My data drive or data drives are on at least SATA 1.0 and higher. Could be 1.1, could be 1.2, could be 2.0, could be 2.1. You see my point, okay? There are no SCSI controllers in play anywhere. I've also removed the CD-ROM drive as well. We did that earlier. And I have also changed these boot options that I showed you from UEFI to BIOS. At this point, this is a really good time to snapshot this virtual machine, and we could just say ready for deploy. All right. Okay, so we do that. It takes a snapshot of that really quick, right? Because it's powered off. And now what we're going to do is we're going to power this on. I'm going to power it on. I'm going to launch the web console. You'll see that it's going to boot to the TinyCore image build. Now this will boot this little miniature version with a GUI of TinyCore Linux. The only thing that we want to do here is we want to get its IP address. And that way we can establish an SSH session to it. On the Mac, I use a program called Termius. You can use whatever program that you're comfortable with that will allow you to SSH to this machine. The reason that I do this is because I now have a series of commands, which I'm going to show you in a second, that's over here on the blog, that is real easy for me just to copy and paste back and forth rather than having to manually type each of those in. So I've got this TinyCore up. I can click in the machine and I can right click. And in some cases, I actually have to use the arrow keys at this point, and I can press the down arrow key one time and then the right arrow key one time, and it highlights applications and terminal. I can press enter. And I'm just going to type ifconfig so I can see what is my address, 192.168.76.178. Perfect. So now what I want to do is I'm going to launch my SSH client, and I'm going to pick something that I've already got running here. You know what? Let's just do a new one. So I'm going to create a new session, and that's going to be 192.168.76.178. The username is going to be TC, and the password is going to be a variation of the word password. And so that's going to be, again, in the blog, but capital P, the @ SSW0RD. All right, and then so when I do this now, it's actually going to allow me to continue and establish my SSH session. At this point, I no longer need this virtual machine console any longer. I can close this. When I jump back over to the blog at this point, we've now uploaded the VMDK, we've added the existing hard drive, we've added the new hard drive, we've booted the VM, we've went and typed the ifconfig command, right? Got the IP address, established the SSH session, and now we are right here at this point, right? Once you have successfully established your SSH connection, now we want to run these commands. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we have sudo privileges, right? So we type sudo space su, and we can see that we're now at root level privileges because we have the little prompt sign there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to update this RP loader. Everything that happens as we do this is all really using this RP loader command. So all I'm doing is I'm copying and pasting this, right? Again, on the Apple, right? So Command C, and I'm just going to click over here and I'm going to Command V. Control C and Control V if you're in Windows. And we're going to go, and it's going to tell me that there's an update. I'm going to say yes to go ahead and update, and it's going to download the latest version of this RP loader. Great. The next command is I'm going to generate a serial number and a MAC address specifically for this version of DSM that I'm going to use, which is DSM 3622. So again, copy and paste. I paste that in, and it's going to give me a serial number and a MAC address, and it's going to ask me if I want to update this user config JSON file. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to press enter. We're going to come back and grab this MAC address in a couple of moments, because we're going to take this MAC address and we're actually going to set a custom MAC on the virtual machine with this MAC address that was just created. So when I come back up here in a minute, remember, I told you we're going to do this. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm now going to go ask the machine to look at and try to map all of the drives that are attached based on this specific version of the DSM that we're going to run. So I'm telling it to do a SATA map, and this Broadwell 7.01 is the chipset version of DSM for that DS3622XS Plus. So again, just copy and paste, and I run. It's going, hey, it's running in VMware, and it's identified what it believes is the SATA map. The next thing that we do is we're just going to back up its core config. The reason that we're going to do this is if you ever decide at some point that you want to reload this or you want to reinstall it, you don't actually have to go through these steps again. You can literally just go through the build process, because it will already know what the drive mapping is. The serial number will have already been captured. The MAC address will have already been captured. And that's the reason that we do the backup. Do I want to update? Yes. I'm going to say Y, and I'm going to press enter, and it's going to do its backup. The final thing that we're going to do is now actually tell it to go do this base level install of DSM onto this machine. And I append this word auto at the end. And the reason that I do that is because what this will do is it will automatically interrogate the virtual machine. It'll look at all the hardware components that are part of this virtual machine and automatically try to install all the necessary drivers. For example, the VMXNet3 driver, right? The VirtIO driver, because it's running as a virtual machine. So when I run this command, it identifies those, and then what it begins to do is it begins to download the version of DSM that it needs for the actual installation. So if I just bring this up a little bit, and I apologize, I got to work this out a little bit. But what it's doing at this moment is it's downloading that DSM file right directly from Synology's website. Now I've already got that downloaded. I don't actually need to use that here. And then once all of this finishes, it will actually show us everything that it needs to show us. I'm going to drag this up a little bit and just try to give you the whole gist of what it's doing here. So it's finished. It's created the bootloader. And at the very bottom here, and I'm just not 100% sure if this will show on the video, but it's telling you what does the boot menu look like when you reboot this. So at this point, the only thing I need to do is I'm going to power this off, because I now need to go modify the MAC address for the virtual machine network adapter, the VMXNet3 adapter. And I do that back over here by typing power off. It's just the word power off, all one word, and it'll actually power off that VM. And again, see this word right here? This is what we're doing. So I've typed power off. I'm going to give this a moment. I'm going to let this actually shut itself off. And in the process of doing that, remember I told you I'm going to need to come back over here, and I'm going to need to grab this MAC address. And you can see that right there. So I highlight that, and I'm going to put that on the clipboard by doing the Command C. And we're just going to look at this again. Okay, I clearly didn't type in the window when I typed power off. Okay, very good. All right, so I've typed power off. It tells me that the connection is closed. You can see here that the connection is closed. That means that the virtual machine has powered off. Over here, you can see that it is indeed powered off, right, with the status of powered off. So the last and final thing that we do is we edit the settings one more time, and we expand out the virtual machine NIC. And right here where it says automatic for the MAC address, we're going to choose manual. And then we're going to highlight this whole area, and we're going to paste that MAC address from earlier, and we're going to click on OK. All right. And now we're ready to boot this for the first time and actually install the DSM software to make this a usable Synology NAS. We're going to power this on, It's important that as soon as you power this on that you open up the web console, jump here, press the down arrow one time after you click in the window to highlight it, because the reason is we're installing this in a virtual machine, so we need to highlight SATA. You also could potentially boot this on bare metal off of a thumb drive. So I could have went through this entire process and actually installed DSM on a thumb drive, a bootable thumb drive, and I could have plugged that into a machine, and I could have went through this whole entire thing. And now that it's booting for the first time, I would just need to tell it, hey, that I'm booting from a USB versus the SATA controller. Again, we're using virtual machine, so I'm going to choose SATA. I'm going to press enter. I only have to do this the very first time. Subsequent reboots, even if you power it off and you power back on again, it's going to remember that previous boot position that you selected. It's going to then automatically select SATA and allow you to boot it up. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to get to a Windows machine or another machine that's on the same network as this. And I guess I could actually just show you this in a different browser. You can go to find.synology.com. Has to be within the broadcast domain. And it's going to go out there and it's going to search for Synology devices. This process will vary depending on the speed of the machine and the amount of resources that you gave it. The boot up time on this is typically somewhere between 1 to 2 minutes. But once you run this, it's actually going to come up and say, hey, look, I found this brand new Synology. Notice it's the DS3622XS Plus. It got a DHCP address, so it's important that whatever network that you boot this on for the first time has DHCP running. And it tells you that it's not installed. So I can now click on connect. I can accept this agreement and I can go next. Privacy statement, continue. And I'm going to upload the file. So we'll click on install here and we'll browse. And I already have this file. And I got this file basically by just jumping out to Synology's website and going to their downloads and putting in DS3622 Plus, and it gives me the ability to download the PAT file for that platform. Well, that's this file. This is straight from Synology. It has not been modified in any way. Once I've selected it, we click next. It's going to tell me that that one data drive, remember, the one drive that I added on SATA 1.0 is going to be deleted. I check the box to understand, and I click continue. This process will take a couple minutes. It will increase until you get to around 55–56%, and then it will carry on. I mentioned that 55–56% because if you did something wrong, then that's going to be the point that it's going to fail. If you get past the 55–56% and you see it go all the way up and then kind of begin this countdown process, that's a really good sign that you've done everything correctly at this point as you followed along in this video and also following along in the blog. So we can see here we're at 57%, 58%, and it's carrying on. That's great. When it finishes the install, it's going to begin this 10-minute countdown. It really doesn't take 10 minutes in a virtual machine type of an environment. Based on my testing and my experience, it's typically less than 2 minutes before it will actually come up and present you with that welcome screen. So we've begun this 10-minute process now. As I mentioned, I'm not going to touch this. This is running in Google Chrome, and I'm going to do my best here to just talk for the next minute and 20 seconds because I want you to see what this looks like in an unedited video. A lot of times there are videos out there where people will stop and pause the video to try to bleed out the dead space in the video, and that's really great. And one of the only reasons that I'm going to leave this here is because it took me a lot of time to get to this point. As I became encouraged by the Red Pill release and the work that TinyCore has done to be able to provide kind of that latest and greatest version of DSM that's running in a virtual machine, when I went out and did my research, there isn't a whole lot of blog information out there yet. There isn't anything really that's what I would call clear English that's easy for someone like me to understand. The information that I found was a little sporadic. Some of it was in Korean and other languages, and some of the videos that were created, while they had English captions, there was a lot of it that was done in Workstation or maybe done in Proxmox or another hypervisor. And because I live in the vSphere platform, I thought this would be really beneficial for kind of like an all-in-one home lab environment. In fact, I have a DL360 that has a number of drives in it, and what I've done is I've actually used this on my DL360. So now we can see, as I've talked here just a little bit, It's gone through its reboot process and it's now coming up for the very first time, and it's going to show you the welcome to Synology, right? Welcome to DSM 7.0. So we can click on start and we can give this a name. The name is of your choice. I'll just call it Xpenology. I like to create a username that I can remember versus just the default admin that's been created. And we'll go ahead and click next. Now, because we used the serial number and the MAC address that was generated, I could theoretically go out and register this for the Quick Connect .2 to be able to access it remotely, and that would work. I have been told, and I don't know this to be 100% true because I have not done an update yet, but I've been told that as Synology releases updated versions, that you have an opportunity to update this. I still choose to notify me and let me make that decision. I did try to upload the 7.02 beta, and that really did not work for me. So in this point, I would just recommend that you let it to be notify, or excuse me, set it to be notify, and do a little bit more testing. Okay, we're gonna click next. I am going to skip this for now, but this is where I was telling you that if you had an account, you could sign in and you could actually register this so that you can access it using Synology's service. I'm just gonna say skip. I'm going to agree to this by checking this box, and I'm going to hit submit. And because it is a new install, the first thing that it's going to prompt me to do is to create the storage pool. So I'll click on create now and then just start. It's going to default to Synology hybrid RAID, a single drive. That's fine. We'll click next. Here's that drive, that 100 gig drive that I created, and I'm going to click next again. I'm going to skip the drive check because it's a virtual hard drive. I will choose max amount of space here, which will make this 95 gig. You could put in the description here if you choose. We'll let it be BTRFS because that is, again, what Synology recommends. You could certainly choose ext4 if you wanted to. And then finally, we'll hit apply, making sure that we acknowledge that all the data is going to be erased. And we're going to let it create that storage pool. Again, because this is virtual, this happens really fast. The storage pool is now healthy. You can see that I've got 91 gig available, and we are pretty much done. I can close this at this point. The other thing that I'll tell you is that by default, there are a couple of packages here that can be updated. We'll click on install and see that there's an update for Active Insight as well as the SMB service, and we can confidently update both of those. And that's pretty much it. We now have a working Synology. We can do anything that we want to here. I've installed Virtual Machine Manager with no issues. I've installed the Docker service with no issues. In fact, the only thing that we have left to do, and this will be interesting for you guys, is I am going to go ahead and I'm going to go over to the Package Center, and I'm going to do a search for Docker. And I'm going to install Docker. And the reason I'm going to install Docker is because my OCD says I really want the VMware tools running on this because it is a virtual machine and it is running on VMware. And as I looked around, there's very little concrete information around where anyone has been able to get the VMware tools running on DSM 7. So I figured that out, and it's an older method, but it works just fine. And I'm going to show you that here. So as I jump back over here, we can see that Docker is now installed. And as I jump back over here to the virtual machine, what I want to show you as I scroll on down is the first thing that we need to do is we need to enable SSH. So let's go back over here and let's go into our control panel. Let's go to Terminal and SNMP and let's enable the SSH service. Make sure to click Apply in the bottom right hand corner and click OK to acknowledge. So we're running at 76.146. So as I did before, I'm going to connect to this. It's got a different IP address, so that's not going to work. And I'll just change this for the moment to 76.146. And I'm going to update this with the credentials that I created earlier. And let's go SSH into this guy. Okay, so now I've got an SSH session, so that's great, right? The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make this directory. And again, I can do this by copying and pasting. So highlight that and Control C, jump back over here and Control V. we need to type in our password that we created earlier when we created the account. All right. And we're just going to do it one more time to make sure that it already exists. And I do that just because I'm paranoid and I want to show you that that command indeed did happen. The second thing that we'll do now is we're going to run this sudo docker command. So what this is going to do is it's going to download a Docker image, and it's going to tell it that every time you restart to always run it. It's going to run under root, and it's going to install this Docker image of Open VMware Tools specifically for Xpenology. Pretty cool, huh? So I jump over here, back to my SSH session, and I paste that in. And it looks for it locally, it can't find it, and then it downloads, runs, extracts, does an awful lot of goodies. Well, when I jump back over here and I leave this for a moment, once it runs the service, that service gets to a running state, it checks back in with the vCenter, and I click on the right virtual machine, well then you can see that I now have a running version of VMware Tools. So what makes this powerful is that I can now come over here to the virtual machine and I can go to power and I can say shut down guest OS, and that will work. There have been other instances of where people have tried a variety of different VMware tools, and the VMware tools actually go to an installed status, but when they try to shut down guest OS, it gives them a failure. So I'm showing you this to say that I have the VMware tools running. I can actually tell it to do a shutdown guest OS, which will actually perform a shutdown by invoking that command from within the VMware tools version that's running, and it will actually shut this virtual machine off. So I let this run for a second, and you can see here that it just changed to a powered off status. So I'm going to put this in the reference for you to see. Just a couple of links here as I've gathered information to share with you in case you're interested in where I got all this information from. This was a long time trial and error to kind of get this process as streamlined, as simple and easy to follow as possible. But I hope that you found it valuable. I hope this helps you get Xpenology installed if that's what you're intending to do, specifically on a VMware vSphere platform. I've demonstrated to you that this is the latest version of DSM running on the latest version of vSphere with ESXi 7.0 and the latest version of DSM, which is 42218. So there you go, and have a great day. Thank you so much.